Good afternoon. This is Catherine Cooper with the Sustainability Learning Center, and welcome to Navigating Product Sustainability. We have about 21 people who have signed up for the program, so I'm hoping we'll see a few more people come on the line. As you do, it would be fantastic if you could introduce yourself in the chat bar, who you are, where you're located today, and maybe what you most want to learn from today. That would be fantastic. Our plan today is I'm going to just do a quick two-slide overview of the Sustainability Learning Center, because if I didn't do that, I wouldn't be doing my job. And then I'm going to introduce you to Kevin, and he's going to do his presentation. During the course of the presentation, if you have questions for him, you can put them in the chat bar. And when he takes a break at about 45 minutes in, he'll answer those questions. I will also be forwarding them to him privately, and if he's able to kind of weave them into the discussion, he will do that. So please definitely feel free to put your questions in the chat bar and to also raise your hand, and if we get a chance before the break, we'll definitely address those. So today's session is being recorded and will be available about 1 hour after the session today. So I'll be sending that out to everyone who signed up so that they have access to the recording. And please feel free within your workplace to share that recording with others within your organization. So to get started, again, the Sustainability Learning Center is a learning and networking hub for sustainability. And really our focus is on professional development and skill certification as it pertains to green or sustainability core competencies. And we do that through instructor-led programs, both face-to-face as well as online, through these lunch and learns, through skill certification around certain areas, and we have an e-learning platform as well. And we also have the Sustainability Learning Network, which many of you may have found as you were signing up for this program. And we do post our webinars on there free and accessible to anybody who wants to go and look at them. We're also working with Canadian Business for Social Responsibility, the International Society of Sustainability Professionals, the Natural Step, and others to sort of consider what is the body of knowledge for sustainability and how do we make sure that we all have the credible skills and knowledge to help move the systems changes that are occurring and that we're trying to drive in order for us to all be more sustainable on the planet. Some of the upcoming programs we have, there is an inspiring engagement program that starts May 7th, and this one is done online in 4 1.5-hour sessions. And then we have 2 sessions coming up in Toronto. This is a face-to-face training that we do with CREG in Montreal. So they're coming here to do their annual life cycle assessment program. So there's a 1-day overview program, and this can be very useful as well to marketing and communications people who are trying to figure out what life cycle assessment means for their products and processes and services. And then for the 2 full-day program, it's really focused more for people who are managing products or sustainability programs, and they're trying to understand where life cycle assessment fits into that. Our next webinar is focused on green IT, and that's happening on June 11th. So if you know someone who's in the IT area and they are interested in knowing how to green up their IT programs, that's where we're going with that. And then there's some on-demand programs that are available at all times. So you can focus on those as well. And so this is just a little information about our life cycle assessment program for marketing and communications and our 2-day program, both being held in Toronto. And as I say, for all the recordings later on, we'll be posting them here on our Sustainability Learning Network. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to Kevin Brady. And he's with the Sustainable Enterprise Consulting, and he's been working in this area for more than 20 years. He's been a consultant to a wide range of companies, Alcoa, BASF, Boeing, Shell, Johnson & Johnson. He's spent many, many years working in this area and has tons of experience. In the mid-1990s and early 2000s, he was a leader in the development of some of the ISO standards. And so that's quite exciting, as well as he's also the co-author of the book Mapping the Journey, Strategies and Action Towards Sustainable Development, and a book on eco-efficiency and materials. And he's currently a lecturer, and I think this is right. It's either Carleton or Ottawa University, Kevin. I'm sorry, I kind of made that one up because I knew you were doing it. And around product, Carleton is, so I did get that right. And he also has a Bachelor of Science in Biology and a Master of Environmental Studies at York University. So welcome, Kevin. We're so thrilled to have you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. I appreciate the opportunity. And hello to everyone. So in addition to what I'm doing today, the work that I'm going to focus on draws heavily on my experience as a founder and partner with Five Winds International, which is a management consulting company which recently merged with a German firm, PE International. I'm still a senior associate with that firm. So as Catherine mentioned, I've been working in this field for 20-some years now, and the focus of my career really has been on deepening my understanding of the sustainability attributes of products and the companies that produce them, and then using that understanding to help organizations and clients navigate their way to improve performance. And that arc of my career has really been, to use a cliche, a bit of a journey. And I'm always deepening my understanding and changing my thinking and improving my perspectives on how to do this. And I'm hoping that I can transfer to you some of that understanding today. The genesis of this presentation and the ideas in it that I'm going to share with you came about due to two experiences I had in the fall of last year. The first was my facilitation of an organization called the Material Stewardship Roundtable. The Roundtable is run by the International Council for Mining and Metals, and it's a forum to bring material producers in the mining and metals industry together with end users, automotive, building and construction, electronics, and other industries and stakeholders that are concerned with materials, bring them together so that they can both better understand each other's perspectives and better understand how to facilitate the stewardship of materials across the life cycle. So at the October meeting of the Roundtable, which is the most recent meeting that I've facilitated, the focus of that discussion was really on how we measure the sustainability performance of products and materials. And to get a better understanding of that, we brought into the meeting some of the world's leading initiatives. So we had the executive director of the Water Footprint Network come in and talk to us about how that organization is trying to develop methodologies for organizations to measure their water footprint. We had the research director of the Sustainability Consortium. For those of you who may not be familiar with the consortium, it's a group of academics, retailers, leading consumer products companies, NGOs, and other interested stakeholders who are trying to define how to measure product sustainability. We had a representative from the Product Research Forum, which is an offshoot, if I can say it that way, of an organization called WRAP in the UK, which is looking also at identifying hotspots in products and measuring sustainability performance. We had a representative from the Carbon Trust, who's been a leader in the measurement of carbon footprints of products and methodologies to do that. And we had somebody from the Aluminum Stewardship Initiative, which is a new initiative led by the International Union of Conservation of Nature in conjunction with some aluminum companies and automotive companies and other downstream users of aluminum to try to get at how to enhance the stewardship of that material across its life cycle. So that set of presentations, full-day session, looking at how organizations are trying to develop methodologies to measure sustainability, provided me with some deeper insights than I had previously in terms of how that is occurring. Right after that meeting, I attended the inaugural Product Environmental Footprint World Forum. It used to be called the Product Carbon Footprint World Forum in Germany. And at that meeting, I made a presentation where I speculated on, what is the future of product sustainability? And the reason I focused on that, the future, was when I look at the product environmental footprint work that's being done in the European Union, and I should mention they also presented at the roundtable meeting. That work, which is being led by the Joint Research Council of the European Commission, is really focused on developing a life cycle-based methodology focused on a limited set of environmental impact categories to measure and help people compare product performance. And as critical and as important as that focus is, and the product environmental footprint methodology has been developed, and there's pilot projects underway in the European Union to test that methodology and to learn from it. As critical as that is and as important as it is, I felt it was a bit too narrow. And it raised some, thinking about that, it raised some questions in my mind. On this next slide, here are some of the things that I started to think about. One is, are we really evaluating the full suite of attributes on materials and products when we're talking about sustainability? A second question is, how can we integrate information and tools and resources we have better into product development processes, material selection processes, so that we can advance sustainability. A key thing to do that effectively is to make sure that we understand the decision-making context that information is going into, so that we can make more effective interventions into organizations that lead to longer lasting and more meaningful change. And a final question I had in my mind is, and this is a question in the minds of many people who have worked on sustainability issues over the years, is are we moving fast enough? If you look at the impacts that we're facing with respect to climate change, the consumption of resources, that's a question that is increasingly important. So I'm going to get into primarily the attributes of the products and go through my thinking on that. But just before I do that, I don't want to get into the drivers of this, but I just wanted to mention the key driver from my perspective, which is population increases. This slide shows UN projections on population based on low, medium, and high fertility rates going out to 2100. And if I look at this population curve, I can, look at some touch points for myself. So in my lifetime, and I'm 53 years old, the world population has doubled. If I look at the span of my 20-year career on sustainability, we've added about 2 billion people to the planet. If I look at my eldest son, by the time he turns 50, we're going to be in a situation where we're adding, somewhere between 1 billion and 5 billion more people to the planet. And if you look at the common projection from the United Nations population program, they're estimating by 2050 we're going to be at 9.3 billion people. This is, and it doesn't take much thought really to come to this conclusion, fundamentally going to change the way we produce and consume products. And it means that a lot of the things that we're looking at today with respect to how to measure sustainability performance is is going to become even more important, more intensified, and we are going to have to move to solutions more quickly. And I think the security of the future of the planet lies in a raised consciousness of this issue and the fact that we do have to change and we have to change more quickly. It lies in better cooperation of all the different actors in product systems and value chains to try to improve the sustainability performance of those systems. And it's going to rely critically on innovating new approaches and ways to deliver value and well-being to individuals on the planet. That's just a bit of background on the drivers from my perspective. Population, of course, drives all kinds of other impacts with respect to climate change and resource use and waste creation. So it is a kind of a critical measure from my perspective. So shifting from that driver to what is product sustainability. So if we look at that question and look at the body of work that's been done to date on it, we can identify some attributes. So one of the attributes is the resource base that is creating the materials that are going into the product. So is that resource base being sustainably managed is a key question. Another key thing that practitioners in product sustainability are very familiar with is understanding the life cycle impacts of the product system. So where are the hotspots with respect to uses of resources and impacts on the environment, but also what are the benefits across the product system. So in some cases you may have materials going into products that are imparting characteristics that make them more sustainable. So understanding that is an important aspect in terms of looking at product sustainability. Another area that is critical from my perspective is understanding the impacts of the products on ecosystems and human health and welfare. That's a attribute that's not really measured very well in life cycle, although people do it. But we need another set of tools and information to really understand that effectively. Another area that is important, of course, are the socioeconomic aspects associated with the production of that product, its value chain, all the different individuals that are working on it and touching that product throughout its system. And it's important to understand that social practices are being done responsibly and that the economic benefits are being shared fairly. Another aspect of product sustainability is the total cost and life cycle costs. So are we measuring those costs effectively? Are we internalizing costs that need to be internalized, such as the cost of carbon or the cost of water or air where that's not priced? And finally, looking at product sustainability, and my work has been with large multinational corporations that are developing products. You know, a primary consideration is it a good product? Is it fit for purpose? Does it meet the technical requirements? So I think we need to not forget about that as we look at sustainability attributes. And there may be other attributes that we could add in, but these are the ones I'm going to talk about today. So taking each of these in turn, I think the emphasis that is placed on evaluating a product system and getting information in each of these different areas can be affected by a number of things. It's affected by the characteristics of the product system. It's affected by the strategy of the company. It's affected by the availability of data to understand these different areas and what the impacts or benefits might be. It's affected by the organization's ability to influence these different areas. It's affected by their stakeholders, their customers, their employees, the knowledge of the product development team, their value chain partners. It's affected by what their competitors are doing. So I think I'm pointing that out just to say that product sustainability, there's an ideal way to look at it, and then there's the reality of what happens in organizations, and they're dealing with a lot of different factors in terms of how they're viewing product sustainability and how they're measuring it and what areas they're emphasizing. So if we look at the resource base, you know, today typically what I've seen is a lot of effort to look at, you know, how are we using the resource? Are we using it in a sustainable way? And are we running into any constraints? If you look at the work of the United Nations International Resource Panel, which is kind of an equivalent to the IPCC for climate change, but focused on resources, they've put out a lot of research to try to understand materials and how they're used and whether we're running into problems in terms of their availability for the economy and society. Another way to look at sustainability in materials is the intensity of the use of those materials. So how much materials are we using per unit of product? And we see a lot of measures like that in companies and trying to understand their use of materials and to reduce the use of materials. And then there's a lot of work around the quality of the materials and how they're being produced. So are we managing the resource base in a sustainable way? And you see certification schemes and other schemes out there like the Forest Stewardship Council, Marine Stewardship Council, Better Cotton Initiative, et cetera, that are trying to determine the right standards of practice to ensure the sustainable management of the resource. Those elements are being addressed, but there's also other elements in looking at sustainability and resources that I think are not so well addressed. One of those areas is looking at the benefits of the materials and the use of the product. So, you know, what I've seen is a lot of situations where people are doing a comparison of the resources that they're being used in their products and materials that are being used in their products on a kilogram per kilogram basis or some other physical unit. You know, that is one way to look at the relative sustainability performance, but it really shouldn't be done on that kilogram to kilogram basis. It should be done in the context of the full product system, because the materials could be adding some benefits into that product system: durability, anti-corrosion, antibacterial characteristics, and others. I think it's really important for people that are looking at sustainability of their products and evaluating the materials to consider that material across the full product system. Another area that is not so well addressed is the cost equation. So life cycle costs could be cost associated with the pollution upstream, could be cost associated with the management of the waste of the product system, could be cost associated with production processes. Those factors aren't so well addressed. And finally, social performance issues are not so well addressed in my view. I mean, I think we have issues that come up on a kind of one-off basis, or a spotlight gets shined on certain issues like conflict minerals or labor practices in developing countries. But a comprehensive evaluation of social aspects of materials, how they're produced, what benefits those production of those materials and parts is not so well done. Having said that, I think what we're seeing is, as I mentioned earlier, these certification schemes that are coming into play, and they're trying to help people that are interested in choosing materials better understand if those materials have been produced in a socially and environmentally responsible way. So we have Better Cotton, as I mentioned, Forest Stewardship Council, and a number of other commodities coming up with standards of practice and processes to give confidence to the people that are selecting materials that those materials are better than maybe other options that they might choose. You have organizations like ICMM, which I mentioned, which are trying to put forward standards of practice within their industry to ensure that they're measuring and reporting and acting on the key issues important for their industry. And so there's a lot of these different programs that are coming into play. And I think from a product sustainability perspective, it's important to think about, you know, when looking at these types of initiatives, that one, different materials have different characteristics and different sustainability attributes that are most important. So I've done a lot of work in mining and metals, and the sustainability attribute of that is very important is recovering those materials and bringing them back into productive use in the economy. For forest products, it's the sustainable management of the resource base is very important. So that's a consideration that has to be looked at when looking at the resources. Availability, scarcity is a key thing, and that's affected by technology. It's affected by consumption trends, and those are difficult things to really get a handle on, and our understanding and learning and tools to do that evolves over time. And the different geographical, regional situation of where those materials are coming from comes into play when you're looking at that as well. So a material, many materials are being harvested, if I can use that term, in different regions around the world. Those different regions may have different standards, different regulatory climates, and that has to be taken into consideration. So that's a little bit about resources. If I look at the solutions out there that most people are looking towards in terms of getting a better understanding of whether their materials and resources are produced effectively, there's a leaning towards a reliance upon the Forest Stewardship Council type model, where a program is put into place that sets a set of environmental and social standards, engages the right stakeholders in the development of those standards, and tries to be as transparent as possible with what's happened, tries to provide an understanding of all of the different players in the value chain of those materials and whether they're doing the right things. So I think when you're looking at those certification programs, you have to be cognizant that some of them are good and some of them are bad, and be looking for attributes that I've listed here that will give you an indication, this is a good program, and that can give me confidence in terms of the materials and resources that I'm selecting if they've been validated by the program. Moving to life cycle impacts and benefits, I started out working on LCA issues in Environment Canada and Ministry of Environment 20 years ago. And over the course of my career, there's been great advancements in life cycle data information software that's available to people trying to understand that aspect of sustainability of products. But it's really important to understand that LCA is still it's a great tool, but it's only robust for a limited set of resource and environmental impact categories. It doesn't tell the full story. And there's a danger, and I've seen it many times, where people are claiming they've done an LCA study and they're measuring the sustainability of the product. Well, they're not. They're measuring certain attributes of the product, important attributes like primary energy demand and contributions to global warming, and they're measuring them very effectively across the life cycle. But it's not the full story. The other thing about LCA is, of course, the product system that you're looking at greatly affects the robustness of the study that you may be doing. It's relatively straightforward to do a study on packaging. It's much more complex to do it on a smartphone or a vehicle, although we're getting much better at doing that. And one thing that a lot of people don't know who aren't involved in doing these types of studies is that there's a large amount of uncertainty in them. It's decreasing all the time, but in a complex product, even a very good study can be, plus or minus 10% or so. So we have to be very careful in the application and the communication of life cycle information. And to end on a more positive note on life cycle, if we utilize LCA very well, what we're able to do is take that information and migrate it into the next generation product development, understand where the hotspots are, and improve our designs of the next generation of products. And that's where LCA really shines, is giving that information to design teams and product development teams. So this is a slide from a colleague of mine, Jim Fava, who's the chair of the UNEP Lifecycle Initiative, where he kind of explains the evolution of the lifecycle toolbox over the last 20 years. And we've gone from having a very quantitative kind of approach to LCA We now have a suite of tools and approaches. So we have different checklists and scorecards and directional tools. The example here is from Johnson & Johnson has developed a scorecard for their product development teams to look at environmental issues that are most important for their products and to drive improvement of that. To broader-based hotspot analysis type tools. We're looking at a product category and we're saying for that product category, where are the major hotspots and where should we really be focusing our attention in terms of looking at improvements. To the traditional quantitative LCA tools. So that suite of tools available to us is great. And we need to apply those different tools at different points in the product development system. The hotspot tools, the lifecycle screening tools are really useful in product concept ideation phase. LCA is a great tool once you've developed the product to inform the next generation of design. And just to give you an illustration of how sophisticated this is getting, this is another this is a tool that has been developed by using data from PE International and the tool Autodesk, and developed by a software developer here in Timberlake called Tally, and it's enabling building designers to look at systems within the building and actual whole building analysis, so taking all the products that go into the building and evaluating different options. So in this example I'm showing you here from Tally is a comparison of a different cladding system for a building, one a corrugated shingle and the other a translucent panel. And these different bar graphs are showing different impact categories, and the different colors reflect different life cycle stages, manufacturing, maintenance, end of life. And it's able to give the designers a comparison. And this type of analysis is happening almost in real time. So you're getting this lifecycle data integrated into tools like Autodesk and SolidWorks, CAD systems, product lifecycle management systems, and that's a good thing. Although we still need to exercise some caution when we're using those types of tools. Moving on to risk and ecotoxicity attribute, I think this is a really challenging area. I think with maybe the exception of some work that's been done in the EU, with their REACH program, generally we're losing or undermining our ability to effectively evaluate the ecological and human health risks of chemicals and products. My clients in the past, we would rely on government's priority substance list to identify chemicals of concern, maybe go beyond that with some of our own information. And as we get constraints around government's ability to invest in doing this sorts of analysis and the industry's ability to invest in the analysis, then we're putting ourselves somewhat at risk. And we have lots of new substances that are coming out on the market, things like nanotechnology that are coming in virtually unregulated, and we have to be concerned about that. And we have to be concerned also about cumulative impacts, and that's not widely understood. So what I'm seeing in our client base and at PE, where I'm an associate, and the work I'm doing with Sustainable Enterprise Consulting is, a precautionary approach. So let's find out what materials are not problematic and try to optimize the use of those in our product systems, as opposed to developing blacklists and gray lists of problematic substances that we have to manage and be worried about. An example of this is SC Johnson. They did some work a number of years ago to develop what they call the green list. So what are the materials and chemicals that we need to, or that we can be highly confident about in terms of using in our product systems? And what they do to develop the green list is they've developed categories of the materials, criteria for evaluating those different materials, and then a scoring system so that they understand which materials should be restricted, which are acceptable, and which are the best materials to use. And then they put a kind of a management system in for the product development teams to drive them towards using the best materials in their products. So that's an example of sort of moving the chemistry forward, if I can call it that. And they're also being transparent in terms of the ingredients they're using and publishing that on their website. Moving to the social economic factors, and my apologies for moving so fast here, but we do have limited time. You know, I think our understanding of social impacts of products and product systems is evolving from, you know, looking at specific issues such as child labor or conflict minerals and bribery to a more comprehensive analysis of social aspects across the life cycle. So looking at workers' rights, looking at human rights, looking at how companies are interacting with communities they operate in, and how rents are shared and revenues are shared, and health and safety of workers and communities. So we're getting more sophisticated in understanding that we need to look at the social aspects and the economic contributions of the companies producing the materials and products from a broader base of metrics. And we're seeing tools being developed out there, such as social hotspot database that's being developed by the Sustainability Consortium. And we're starting to see, you know, a documentation of, you know, what are the key categories of performance that we should be looking at, whether it's around workers or consumers or society or local communities. And the UN has developed some work in this area, and people are starting to put together analysis like this. And this is a slide showing a social life cycle impact assessment for a laptop computer. So similar to life cycle studies where we map out the entire industrial system and the different stages associated with it, they've done this, but they're looking at, okay, in this system, where are the positive effects and where are the negative effects from a social perspective. So this is really encouraging to see this type of analysis and to see it start to be married with environmental, we focus life cycle assessment and used in decision making. The other area, the second to last area I want to talk about was cost. I won't say much about this except that, you know, we have many, many, many examples of companies that have saved money while improving the performance of the products, reducing the impact. Sometimes the term used for this is eco-efficiency. There's lots of tools out there. BSF has an eco-efficiency analysis tool. It's well tested, well developed. The World Business Council for Sustainable Development has an eco-efficiency learning module that helps people do this. And I think one of the key challenges in terms of cost is really understanding the true life cycle costs across a product system. So we have inputs and outputs to the systems that aren't well monetized, carbon, other pollutants, the impact of production on watersheds. They're just not priced properly, if at all, and that's a major deficiency in our knowledge base when it comes to evaluating sustainability of products. So we need that, and we also, I think, need some more metrics that provide eco-efficiency type analysis, because businesses can use those metrics more effectively, I would say. And if you look at a lot of the standards and guidelines in terms of how we should measure product sustainability, they tend not to integrate the cost considerations very effectively with the environmental, and I think that's the direction we need to head in. I'm going to skip this example of life cycle costing tools because I think there's lots out there, and just jump to the final attribute that I wanted to talk about, and that's the fit for purpose. You know, it has to be a good product. The sustainable product, the design of one of those products has to be good design from a technical, cost, aesthetic, functional perspective, as well as from an environmental and social perspective. And I think that's common sense, but it's something that we really need to keep in mind when we're looking at measuring sustainability performance products. So I want to close with just a few thoughts on how we can start to integrate a broader perspective on sustainability of products into business. And, you know, I think it all starts with vision and leadership within organizations. And, you know, in the early days of 5 Wins and the work we were doing there, we had a small group of leadership companies that were out there trying to move the yardsticks forward and improving their products from an environmental, social perspective, cost perspective. Today, we're seeing a lot more companies doing that, which is fantastic. And we're seeing some really thoughtful leadership from CEOs of major corporations who've maybe been on the learning curve for a little longer. So you've got people like Paul Pullman, the CEO of Unilever, saying, you know, we really need to look at different economic models that are better balancing environmental and social and economic factors. And you've got people like Frans van Houten, the CEO of Philips, that is committing their company to really contributing to a more circular economy and designing products that are more upgradable and maintainable, and it can be mined at their end of life for materials and components. So I think the willingness of these CEOs of major corporations to step out and say we need to do things differently contributes to the ability of people within their organizations and other organizations to do the analysis required to make better decisions. And if you look at those organizations that are on the leading edge, one of the common factors is that they've looked out into the future. They've looked at those population curves. They've looked at the future of resources. They've looked at the impacts of production and consumption on society, and they've concluded that we have to move forward in a different way. This is some work from the World Business Council on Sustainable Development they did a few years ago to look at the world in 2050, and then to try to backcast in terms of what we have to do to get to a more sustainable world. And this type of thinking, the scenario analysis and future visioning, is critical, I think, to enable the organization to take a broader perspective and take some risks in terms of designing more sustainable products. This is just an example of an outcome of that type of thinking from Philips, where they're traditionally sell a lot of lighting, and now they're looking to a business model where they're selling light as a service instead of light bulbs. And this is an idea that's been around for a long time, moving to product service systems, so selling the service as opposed to the product. But here we have it being operationalized by a major multinational corporation and seen as a key part of their strategy. So that's a positive sign. Another thing that I think that is important in terms of integration is having integrative sustainability assessment tools. And we're seeing some good movement there. Life cycle management approaches and techniques that are covering the different attributes of the product's sustainability performance that I laid out. The term sustainable life cycle assessments being used, and people are working on methodologies for that. Companies like BASF have developed specific tools to look at social, environmental, and economic factors. And the Sustainability Consortium, if you look, and I encourage you to look deeply at what they're doing, they're looking at a hotspots analysis approach that takes into account environmental, social factors as well. So those integrative tools are required to really move things forward. And then another thing that I think is really important, and I'm not going to touch on this, but you'll see it in the slides later in depth, but understanding the perspectives of different actors around the value chain. In our work, my work, I've worked with the material suppliers and the transportation and logistics people, procurement, operations, sales and marketing, and all of these different players and actors have different perspectives and different drivers for what they're doing. Outside stakeholders like NGOs and consumers have different information that they want, and I think we need to be cognizant of all these different players in the value chain of products and what they're focused on. The roundtable that I mentioned earlier that I work with, where we bring the mining industry together with automotive and building construction and other players, they were really quite surprised, I think, and gained from learning the different perspectives from those two different ends of the spectrum, if I can call it that. And I think that's something that we need to pay more attention to find good solutions. And, you know, there is a toolbox out there. I think that toolbox is overflowing. So I don't think that's the problem from my perspective. Of course, you know, software and data and information can always get better, and it's rapidly improving. But, you know, it's not that we don't know what to do and don't have the right tools. It's more about getting the right information to the right people at the right time. So, you know, how do I get my information, targeted information, whether it be on materials or product systems or impacts or how to move this forward in my organization to the decision makers that need that information, and reflect the right sort of context around that decision. So whether that be, you know, market or regulatory context, or connecting with the personal values of the product development team, or connecting to the strategy of the company. So I think that's an area that we also need to look at in a bit more detail in order to drive sustainability performance forward. Okay, so I think I'll stop there for questions. Anything that you'd like to touch on or challenge or question, I'm happy to address.
Okay, thank you very, very much. That's fantastic. And I see that Philip has kind of picked up where you left off about that discussion of bringing the right people or getting the right information to the right people at the right time. And Philip, I don't know if you're willing to unmute yourself and just kind of discuss that a little bit more deeply, because this, you know, that not only is the toolbox full and there's lots of different tools in the box, but each one of these tools, as you've mentioned, have their own purposes and opportunities, and it's very complicated. And how do we get people within organizations to start to embrace their understanding that this is something that they need to focus on, and that they need to know this information, because they don't know what they don't know at this point. Philip, did you want to expand on that at all? The reason I'm opening up to Philip, because he is actually a product designer in Germany and has just finished this master's degree in decision-making systems. So, Philip, what are your thoughts on this?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, and I can only ground my comment in my own experience that there could be a lot more achieved if the decision-making was done earlier on. There's more and more pressure in companies to reduce their cost risk. And so they put pressure on suppliers early on and try and get a definition of a product almost before the product's even designed. And therefore, they nail down their costs early. But of course, if you then say, well, maybe it would be a good idea to invest in this material for this car seat, for instance, what do you think? It's got these qualities, you could market it as a great environmental product, blah, blah, blah. They're not interested because it would destroy their cost target. And so it's really about getting the right decision for the right people really early on.
Yeah. And I think there's a couple of factors, Philip, that can help there. I mean, if you look at Unilever, for example, one of the factors that's enabled them to really focus on their sustainability living plan and start to walk a different path is they stopped quarterly reporting to the analysts. Really? They just said they're not going to do it. You know, and I think that opens up more space because you're talking about longer term value as opposed to quarterly you know, performance. And then I think the other factor that can really change that equation or that conversation is putting a price on pollution and the negative and social environmental impacts. So tighter regulatory market conditions that put a price on externalities, you know, will bring those cost discussions closer to the product development teams.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, another point that kind of frustrates me a little bit is what people define as sustainable and recycling. Of course, it's all in personal interpretation, but for instance, sending cars to be basically burnt is considered recycling, so the materials are burnt off and you generate energy, but the material gone forever then.
And I think that the term we've been using and bandying around for a long time was served the purpose very well, because it allowed everybody to get into the conversation, and now we're at a point where we're going to start talking about, what does it really mean? Because what it really means is really important for the future of business and the future of society. I'm not too troubled in the sense that I think that we are having that conversation, and it's starting to happen.
It brings that back to that question of that closed loop, which you mentioned, that Philips is using, and of course Interface attempted that model where they were providing the service rather than the product. How is that going for Philips, or is it still too early to say about how that model is working?
Well, the article that I read, now Philips isn't a client, we haven't worked for them, but that was just published in McKinsey Quarterly in 2014. So I think it's early days in some ways to understand, but I think if you visit their website, you'll see that they've put together a pretty good rationale on a model, and they're trying to operationalize that circular economy idea. And they've got the CEO front and center saying this is the strategic direction the organization needs to go in. And Catherine mentioned this year I taught a course in industrial design and sustainability, and I tried to impart to the industrial designers that that's the key in an organization, is having that management commitment, and having the measurement systems and the management systems in place. Look for that type of organization, because that will give you the opportunity to drive forward. If you don't have that, you're nowhere.
Yeah. Linda brought up a question that about the life cycle of the personal computers and actually integrating the social aspect. Are you familiar with any products that are doing that, and how are companies talking about the inclusion of the social aspect?
Well, I think what you're seeing is people trying to map out the hotspots associated with the product system. So if you look at the work of the Sustainability Consortium that I referred to, or the Product Research Forum in the UK, people are mapping that system out. They're trying to understand where the greatest resource use is, where the potential hotspots are from an environmental perspective, and at the same time they're overlaying social and, in more advanced cases, even cost information. That's happening in these collaborative forums, trying to develop methodologies to do it. It's happening in individual companies like Unilever and BSF and others that are more advanced, I'd say, in really thinking through sustainability issues. And part of the challenge is, how do you take all that information and understand where the priorities are? How do you evaluate trade-offs? How do you weight, a social benefit against an environmental impact? And those are tricky things to answer, and people are trying to work through how to do that.
Yeah, I think that question of trade-offs is really interesting. You talked about risk, and again, people, please feel free to put up your hand or put things into the chat. You talked, when you were talking about risk and ecotoxicity, about using the precautionary approach, and of course, we've had long discussions for many years about the value of the precautionary approach, but you see, I see with our own government, we're actually going backwards, not forwards on that. What's it going to take for us to actually, embed that in the way that we operate?
Well, I think if you look at to the example that I gave of Vesey Johnson and their green list, it was a better understanding of the expectations of their customers. It was a better understanding of the impacts of their product system, and perhaps a better understanding of what the future looks like. And for an organization like that, and they're a little bit different in that their products are formulations of chemicals. And basically end up out in the environment at some point. The business risk associated with, including problematic substances in their products is very large, and they understood that, and they took steps to avoid that risk. So I think companies on their own, if they do that scenario analysis around the future, and they look at where we're headed from a sustainability perspective, and the constraints and the likelihood of internalizing pollution costs, and et cetera, in the future, will move in the right direction. And then, of course, there's many companies that will ignore that completely or don't believe that it's even coming.
Okay. Linda's asking a question: who do you see, and at what level, introducing the scenario analysis to a company?
Who do I see in terms of helping them with that, or who do I see doing it?
I think she means like within a company, at what level, like where does that come into the organization? So I think that's where she's coming from. And so, Linda, feel free to unmute yourself, Linda, if you want to jump in.
Sure. Linda may want to add some more, but if I don't answer your question, please ask again. The company, the base that I've worked with mostly are large multinational corporations, and that scenario analysis comes in at the highest level. So in the strategic planning processes of these organizations, you will see a longer-term view. Companies like Alcoa and Shell and others, BSF, they're looking out into the future, and they're not using a 3 to 5 year time frame, but they're looking out 15, 20, 25 years, in some cases longer. And what they're bringing to those strategic planning processes is analysis of not only technological and market trends, but they're bringing in the environmental, social trends and information, and they're putting it together. The members of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development all benefited, I think, from that Vision 2050 work, and that was done, at the highest levels of those companies, but a subset of them, but they all benefited from that analysis. And if you haven't had a look at it, I think it's really worth looking at that. It's all freely available, and it's some of the top companies and consultants in the world getting together and saying, okay, what's the future going to look like, and where should we go? So encouragingly, that analysis, when it's done, it's usually done at a high level linked to strategic and business planning processes.
Yeah, so Linda's asking, is there a search term or a website that she could visit that would kind of help her with that?
Not that comes to mind, but if you look at the Vision 2050 site or sub-site of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, I think that would be useful. And
all right.
I see a question.
Okay.
Philip there, Catherine, I just wanted to address. He's asking what's public comparative assertion and why is it an innovation killer? If you look at the work in the European Union to develop product environmental footprint methodology, there's a number of governments that are involved in that work, of course, and they've stated why they want this methodology to be improved and used is to enable consumers to compare the relative performance of products. And I think that that is a very, very difficult thing to do, basically due to uncertainty in the analysis and the underlying data and models. And I think it sets up a conversation where you have winners and losers, and the losers will try to undermine the methodology and the system. And it's better, in my view, for governments to say to all players in the market, you need to improve, and here's the areas you need to improve on, and try to drive and pull innovation from everybody, as opposed to setting up a system where consumers are going to have to pick winners and losers based on data that's not going to be completely certain. I think that we've tried that before. It was tried in Germany before, many years ago, and it didn't work then, and I don't think it's going to work today.
Okay, and hopefully that answered your question, Philip. We're at 1 o'clock now, so we are going to bring this to a close. I would like to thank all of you for coming, and we did have people from all over the world on the call, and I want to thank so much you, Kevin, for your very generous, offer to put this session on. And I think you might want to go to your last slide so that people can see your email address, so that if you have comments or questions, or you're looking to do some work in this area, certainly Kevin is one of the guys to be working with. So please feel free to make direct contact with him. And I will be putting this, sending you a link for the recording for this session, because I know a few of you arrived kind of late, so that will be available to you in about an hour's time, and I'll send that out. And again, thank you so much for coming, and thank you, Kevin, so much for this really amazing presentation, because it's such an important area. We've got a lot of work left to do in it. All
yes,
right.
And thank you, Catherine. I appreciate the opportunity, and hopefully have helped advance people's thinking to some degree.
Okay, thank you, everyone.